This whole story began developing 2 days ago. And from that point on, these terrible events kept on snowballing in a reign of terror that has not abated. The main advice news reporters have been able to get from official sources is to tell private citizens to stay inside their homes, behind locked doors.
A state of chaos and disorder is upon us. Will you take up arms? Will you help us make our last stand? The time is now. Let us be heard as we sing our way into battle.
Beyond what the fuck is that?
Welcome to the stream, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. This is the latest Cicada 3301 stream. I like how this last song, titled Winter Solstice, ends with a view of the world from the ether, which is a medium. It's more of a liquid than a vacuum. It's very interesting. That being said, I wanted to take a look back at Queen Nefertiti and some very interesting connections that seemingly are overlooked. And I found this interesting here with the Winter Solstice out of Nile magazine. As you can see, the two temples pictured here on the screen have been built to match the Winter Solstice. And hi to everyone in the chat there. Nice to see you guys. Shout out to BB Bay, Malinform Boomer, and Davey Crocco. And Say No Way to Yahweh. Nice to see everyone here. A giant hieroglyph in the northern hemisphere, December 21st, marks the winter solstice, shortest, darkest day of the year. From here, the days become longer as the sun inches progressively higher each day. They designed the Karnak temple so that the rising solstice sun would pour directly through the main axis of the temple. Pragmatically, the day also heralded the start of the plantation season. The solstice coincided with the waters of the Nile receding after the annual flooding. It is thought that distinctive pylons or ceremonial gateways that front Egyptian temples formed a giant hieroglyph, Akhet, symbol that represented the horizon. The Akhet sign comprises of two mountain peaks with a sun disk resting between them, and was a potent symbol of rebirth. And as you can see here, the Egyptians were fairly aware of this and designed their temples to match it. This 4,000-year-old temple in Egypt was oriented to the winter solstice. According to a statement released by University of Malaga, researchers led by Maria Dolores Diaz of University of Malaga and colleagues from the University of Jaén suggest that a tomb in the necropolis at Aswan was oriented to the sunrise on the winter solstice so that light fell on a statue within it. The statue depicts the governor of the city of Elephantine, who lived around 1830 BC. At the end of the 12th dynasty, an ancient Egyptian architect, the researchers have shown, would have been able to pinpoint such a location for the tomb and the statue with simple tools. They also employed computer software to reproduce the position of the sun with respect to the horizon in antiquity and conform the design. The solar cycle, the researchers explained, was related to ancient ideas about rebirth and resurrection of the dead. Placing the statue in a spot where sunlight fell on it with the rising sun of the winter solstice marked the beginning of victory of light over darkness. Now, this Temple of Karnak, one of the main busts that you can find there is of Queen Nefertiti, as you can see here, depicted with the rays of the sun, which represented the one monotheistic god. The Egyptian queen Nefertiti, the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, appears beneath the rays of god Aten, painted sandstone, New Kingdom. And this was at the Temple of Karnak, which was built to match the winter solstice. Does Queen Nefertiti represent the victory of light over darkness, the victory of the monotheistic God over the many evil pagan gods? Take a look here at the Temple of Amenhotep IV. The Temple of Amenhotep IV was an ancient monument at Karnak in Luxor, Egypt. The structures were used during the New Kingdom in the first years of the 18th dynasty. The Temple of Amenhotep was constructed outside the boundaries of the precinct of Amon-Ra. To its east, the main temple in the complex was named Gempaten, which means the sun disk, is found in the estate of the god Aten. The other monuments were named Habeten, the mansion of the Benben stone, and Rodmenu, sturdy, the mountains of the sun disk forever. Very little of these buildings remain. They were built quickly using talatat blocks and there could easily be demolished and reused for later structures. The Gempatan appears to have had no roof, and its offering tables were exposed to direct sunlight. In this building or associated with it were red granite and sandstone statues of Akhenaten, a red granite offering tables, and other statues, including a sphinx inscribed with the name of the deity Aten. It was one of the considerable size, 130 by 260 meters. It was also completely destroyed, so that even its foundations have been nearly obliterated. It stood within a mud brick enclosure and was oriented to the east, possibly with an entrance to the west. It led to an open court surrounded by square pillars and colossal statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. HWT Benben, erected to the east, Benben, or Mansion of the Benben, was devoted to the solar cult and was closely associated with Gempatan. Teni Menu seemed to contain domestic and storage rooms and may have been a royal residence, although not enough of the structure remains to clarify the use. The walls of the Teni Menu were reused in the 9th pylon of the main Karnak temple. Interesting. They have been identified and reassembled like a giant puzzle and are clearly exhibited in the Luxor Museum. The reassembled walls show residential, administrative, and royal scenes in solar jubilee scenes of the first Sed festival, which Akhenaten was probably celebrating at the time of his father, Amenhotep III. So here they have these different pylons. Go down and take a look at the 9th pylon. The pylon was constructed for at least by Horemheb as follows and allows access to its top via internal staircases. You can see that here. The remains of the 9th pylon. Here's another pylon. Obelisk. Here you can see the solar deity, or sun deity, is a deity who represents the sun or an aspect of it. Such deities are usually associated with power and strength. Solar deities and sun worship can be found most of recorded history in various forms. The sun is sometimes referred to its Latin name, Sol, or by its Greek name, Helios. Solar vessels and sun chariots. The sun was sometimes envisioned as traveling through the sky in a boat. A prominent example is the solar bark used in Rob and ancient mythology. The Neolithic concept of a solar barge, solar bark, mythological representation of the sun riding in a boat, is found in later myths of ancient Egypt in Ra and Horus. Several Egyptian kings were buried with ships that may have been intended to symbolize the solar bark, including the Khufu ship that was buried at the Great Pyramid of Giza. See the warrior goddess Sekhmet shown with the sun disk. You have the Winter Solstice hypothesis. Which has to do with the reason why they picked December 25th. It's found in all these different mythologies, from Euclideism, Armenian, Baltic, Celtic, Chinese, Germanic, Greco-Roman, pre-Islamic Arabia, Aztec, Incan, Tolima, which is the Aleister Crowley religion, Theosophy. All of these can be found the sun worship. Now, I found this following very, very interesting. It's a very interesting breakdown on Nefertiti's bust and dynamical geometry. The paper is a study into the advanced geometry of Egypt's 18th dynasty iconic statue created by Thutmose. A number of new findings are reported on the architecture of the bust, including the length of the modulus, the palm, the inverted truncated cone-like structure of Nefertiti's bust is examined in detail. Its components analyzed in depth. Measurements are derived at the level of 1/100th of a millimeter. They are based on a 3D scanning of the statue publicly available. So if we go down here, they show you how they measure it. They compare it to other things such as the Aphrodite of Milos. And if you look at the Aphrodite of Milos, it's built to what's known as the silver ratio. The height to width ratio may have been about 2.4 and close to the silver ratio of 2.414, 2.414 to 135 is the silver ratio. You can see these are part of dynamical geometry because they use these ratios. See here the disc thrower, Myron's disc thrower, very close to the what's known as golden ratio, 1.6180. So if we go down here, they can show you how they started to measure and get the different ratios for Nefertiti's bust. See these different breakdowns of the bust. And then I found this. Prime numbers, their ratios, irrational numbers, and stages in the evolution of art, architecture, key measurements of the Nefertiti's bust. Prime numbers, ratios, and irrational numbers in architecture and the arts. A fundamental proposition advanced by this author in the theory of evolution of art and architecture from the Neolithic to the period of classical Greece is that key phase transitions occurred in the evolutionary trail in the art and architecture of Neolithic intentional use of prime number ratios, and a fortiori irrational numbers were absent. Fractions and prime number ratios were introduced in the Iron Age, whereas irrational numbers were introduced and so explicitly acknowledged as intentional design tools in the period of classical Greece. The fundamental proposition regarding evolution in architectural design and arts does not mean to exclude the possibility that isolated cases from the Neolithic and Bronze and Iron Age exist, where in some monuments, presence of these ratios and numbers is observed. For instance, the author is accorded the presence of the golden ratio in certain instances of design in the River Boyne Passage tombs of the late 4th millennium BC and early 3rd millennium BC Neolithic Ireland. Some basic prime numbers and the ratios were used in the days of Neolithic megalithic monuments, and this practice continued until the period of the 18th century dynasty Egypt. The contention that irrational numbers pi, golden ratio, the silver ratio, and the base of natural logarithms were employed in the design of monuments prior to classical Greece, the author finds it unsupported by empirical evidence. This is a theme which the author has formally addressed in the Neolithic monuments Karnak and his Tukmatan's Mask, as the various suggestions appearing in the Giza Plateau and Khufu's funerary chamber were employing irrational numbers, when century papyri Egypt clearly demonstrate that the mathematician of the era did not know about irrational number pi, and most importantly, they didn't derive a good enough approximation to it. This author finds them the precise measurements the authors suggest being present in Khufu's pyramid, as well in the exterior total perimeter to height ratio, are simply gross approximations. So lots of people have found that these various chambers and things, and this guy's saying that that's not accurate because it's not close enough. But he is saying that there are examples of this that do come out of these periods. From the above limited set of examples involving ratios of prime numbers, one may be willing to identify 4 distinct stages. These stages are based on knowledge of fractions, the degree of approximations capable of deriving estimating ratios, appreciation of the decimals of those ratios. Stage A, where the prime numbers 3 and 5 are involved, is a denominator of ratios. Stage B, where prime number 7 is involved, is the denominator of the basic geometry. Stage C, where prime numbers 11 and higher ones are involved, in the stage of advanced geometry. And finally, stage D, the stage of complex or classical geometry, in the case involving irrational numbers, including at least pi, the golden and silver ratio. So it's an interesting article. If you guys want to take a more deep, talks about how there's asymmetry in the bust. The basic static geometry of Nefertiti's bust. Structurally, the most appealing, indeed striking feature of the bust is the formation of the top part of the sculpture. The inverted, truncated, cone-like crown cum head component of it, placed approximately at a 60-degree angle relative to the bottom plane of the sculpture's base, as a bust vectorial plane is defined earlier in the paper. Geometrically and strictly speaking, the structure isn't exactly a cone. It simply undergoes an obvious and functional necessary transition from the bottom up, following the outline of an ellipse-like cranium-shaped contour at its lowest level to almost a circle at the top of the head. The outline of a tomographic section in 5.1. Inspecting the outline of this section is informative. Intersects the top of the crown. It cuts the center of the backside of Nefertiti's base. We see that Tutmo's objective in the design of the inverted cone-like structure is basically following to combine a number of elementary fundamental geometric shapes. A parallelogram, which is in fact a rhombus, a trapezoid, and a right triangle, all included in the bust of Nefertiti. Points A and B are the edge of the outer surface of the truncated cone. Point E is the top of Nefertiti's nose. Point D is the middle of the back of the side, already mentioned. And I thought this was interesting. It is noted nonetheless that the triangle is quite close to the primitive Pythagorean triple right triangle with sides 28, 45, 53. You can see the geometry of the bust. So it's quite an interesting little breakdown for people that are looking into this. But I thought it was interesting that prime numbers were in the Nefertiti bust, the most famous bust of Queen Nefertiti. Now, another interesting thing that there's multiple thoughts on out there is 432 hertz. Now, I think it's interesting about this because there's lots of evidence for it. For example, a study by American Society of Endodontists found that patients who listen to 432 music before and during and after root canal operations experience less anxiety. So when you go down, you can see a lot of people associate this frequency with the different ancient geometric structures. What do Stonehenge and the pyramids of Giza have in common? Other being popular tourist attractions and ancient monuments, they both have a geometric relation to 432, as do many other such sites, such as Sri Yantra. And you have this Graham Hancock guy pointing this out in The Message of the Sphinx. If we multiply its height, 481, 39, 49, by feet, 43200, then divide by 5,280, the number of feet in a mile, we get 39,38685. That's just 11 miles short of the radius of the Earth. So people doing all this stuff, finding math encoded in these ancient structures. Stonehenge is another one. Saturn, the French alchemist and author of Le Mysteries de Cathedrals, noted 432 significance relation to 25920 in the orbit of Saturn. Saturn, because of its greatest distance from the sun of all visible planets, has the longest year, taking less than 30 years to complete one circuit of the zodiac. This means it's best precessional timekeeper of all the planets. And that's interesting because the ancients called Saturn the god of time, Kronos. Saturn completes one precessional great year of 25,920 years. Every 864 of its years, it completes a half cycle. Every 432 of its years, a quarter cycle. Every 216 of its years, an eighth of a cycle. Every 108 of its years, 108 of its years. 432 is a key number in sacred geometry and resonates with the golden ratio. So it's an interesting frequency, and we know that frequency is one of the keys that we're looking for the Liber Primus. And if you want proof that 432 actually does have some medical relevance to it, music tuned to 440 hertz versus 432 hertz and the health effects, a double-blind crossover pilot study. Conclusions. Data suggests that 432 hertz tuned music can decrease heart rate more than 440 hertz. The study results suggest repeating the experiment with a larger sample pool and introducing randomized controlled trials covering more clinical parameters. But there is scientific basis for the difference between 440 and 432 hertz music. There's another study here which provides even more proof. Effect of music specific frequency on sleep architecture and electroencephalograph pattern individuals with delayed sleep latency, a daytime nap study. And the conclusion of this study, it was concluded that 432 hertz music has some significant calming effect as reflected by increased alpha activities without any significant effect upon the sleep latency in daytime naps. I found this one here fairly interesting. This Asafdar Sagol seems to believe there is nothing to any of this. And he bases that on the fact that seconds did not exist back then, so they wouldn't have known what seconds were. They had what's called cycles of time. Pythagoras' tuning system is ratio-based. It's not based on an absolute pitch, but rather on relations from an arbitrary reference pitch. We already know that Pythagoras could not have known what a second is, so he could not know what a hertz meant. Indeed, 432 is a multiplication of the ratio between C and A, where C is 1 and A is 27 over 16, which is the same as 432 over 256. However, this applies to any bass frequency and has nothing to do with a specific hertz. See here. Pythagoras' tuning system was based on a cycling perfect fifths. However, cycling fifths will never get you to complete circle unless one of the fifths is diminished. In other words, the Pythagorean scale has to be tuned down a little each octave in order to maintain its consistency. This makes temperament uneven and sound off when playing music with complex harmonies. And this is exactly the reason it was abandoned. See, De Arithmetica Music. And here you can listen for it yourself. Intonation, Pythagorean intonation. And then it goes down here and he's talking about Mozart. Mozart used 432 hertz for all his music. The only evidence for Mozart's A comes from an ancient tuning fork from 1780 with a tone of A equals 421.6 hertz. This tuning fork belonged to the Viennese piano builder Johann Andreas Stein, the leading piano maker in Vienna at this time, who was responsible for Mozart's pianos, as well as Haydn's and Beethoven's. It is likely they all used 421.6 hertz. I wonder, has anyone ever done an analysis on the Sophia music that we're listening to like right now? Right? Has anyone ever done a breakdown? Is Thomas's music set to 421.6 hertz or 432 hertz? You see this ancient tuning fork here. Verdi made his music 435 hertz. Musicologist Alexander John Ellis has searched and measured and documented ancient pipe organs and tuning forks. Here's a graph representing his most important findings. As you can see, the only mention of 432 hertz was proposed in Italy 1880 by Verdi. We already know this is done for practical reasons rather than spiritual ones. The fact is, before standardization, the pitch of A fluctuated heavily between 400 and 460 hertz. And you can see the different hertzes there as they relate to different things. It was the British Standards Institute who arranged an international conference in London 1939, where it was internationally agreed for A to equal 440 hertz to be the standard. And that's about the cymatics. So this guy's not a big fan of the theory, but he's not the only one. And there's a lot of people that do think that it is. And if you go look at 432 hertz, music of the spheres. The music of the spheres was set to 432 hertz, but not exactly. It's like a ratio. It's because they didn't have seconds back then, so it's based on ratios, but the ratio comes out to basically 432 hertz. Ghost in the chat says, it was before that time frame they discovered the resonance of music. Now, I found this interesting. Someone dropped this in the Cicada Discord. If you are watching this and want to join the Cicada Discord, the link to join is in the description box. Sophia, diatonic code with numbers. You can see how you can associate music with letters and code, this diatonic code with numbers, which I found was very interesting. See how it turns into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And not only can you do that with music, you can also, as we've talked about a bunch, turn music into letters using this sulfa key that I once again added to the show notes for you guys so it's easy to find. I feel like if we could determine the right frequency, which would be the right thing, we could decipher the Liber Primus. I think what we're onto here is the path to figuring out how to decipher this. We now know how to turn music into letters and music into numbers, and we know the frequencies that I think we're looking for is either 432 hertz or 421.6 hertz. And we know that this type of stuff was involved in Nefertiti, her tombs. I find it all very fascinating. The connections just never cease to continue to pile up with this stuff. Anyways, I hope y'all enjoyed. I'll be back with another Cicada stream much sooner than this one took. So I'm going to be diving back into this research. I'll be in the Discord chatting with you guys about stuff. And I hope to see you guys back for the next one. Let's watch this recent one, Memory, unless the new video dropped. Hold on.
Spruce, built by H&R Block.
Oh, this one just dropped. Perfect timing. So I'm going to end with this, the Song of Pythagoras, version 2. Anyways, cheers everyone. I hope you had a wonderful time watching, and I really do appreciate everyone coming over here and checking out these streams. I will see you guys for the next one, and let's watch the Song of Pythagoras and see if we can recognize the 421.6 or the 432 hertz and any of these dynamic geometrical designs being represented in this.